Honourable Lieutenant Governor Dodeswell, Honourable David Egan, Deputy Mayor Monette, distinguished guests, colleagues, sisters and brothers. All of us here in Education International thank our wonderful host member organisations in Canada for their warm welcome to this beautiful city in this extraordinarily large and diverse country. There are few organisations like ours that bring together such a diverse group of people, and there are few places in the world that reflect that diversity as much as Canada does. A country often referred to as a mosaic, composed of more than 200 ethnic origins. This is a country with 2 official languages, built by immigrants upon a foundation of rich Aboriginal culture and heritage. We are honoured to be here and to hold our 7th World Congress in such a place. Thank you again. Canada is beginning to grow on me. This marks the 3rd time I've travelled here in the past year. First to Montreal in June of last year, where we held our successful Unite for Quality Education conference, which brought together more than 400 international delegates. And more recently last March, when we travelled to Banff, Alberta, for the 5th Annual International Summit on the Teaching Profession, where I had the chance to experience at first hand the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. I have come to understand why this is a place that has long inspired people around the world, a country that continues to attract those from all walks of life to move here in search of greater opportunities. Canada has long held the reputation of a fair and just society. When your country can be credited with giving birth to UN peacekeeping and introducing universal health care nearly 50 years ago, there is little question why it is such a strong, attractive global reputation. However, reputations are not carved in stone. To be maintained, they must be carefully nurtured. Past achievements must be built upon. What we see in Canada and many other countries, including my own, presents important lessons for Education International and our member organisations. Lessons that show us that we must be vigilant and strong in the defence and promotion of our values. Lessons that teach us that complacency in protecting those values will lead quickly to their erosion. This is why it is our duty as educators and trade unionists to continue our efforts to actively promote and protect the interests of education and of students, teachers and education workers around the world. Our organisation has made great strides since we last met in Cape Town, South Africa. Of the many resolutions passed, one of the most important involved the launching of a campaign for quality education. Little did we know then what we would go on to create. Our success at delivering the message of quality education for all has ensured that today Education International is known within the highest decision-making circles in the world. Our ideas are valued by leaders of governments and other international organisations. Being the voice of 32 million educators opens a lot of doors. You needn't look any further than the tables we have a seat at today. At the largest education stakeholder conferences, our influence is known. It is felt. Our views are listened to. Unite for Quality Education is not only the theme of this Congress, but it has become the banner under which we advocate and campaign for the right to a quality education for all. It provides us with a trademark, which is the universal platform from which EI promotes and strengthens its core education and trade union values. Quality teaching and learning tools, and quality teaching and learning environments. Our definition of quality education has been acknowledged and adopted by many of the people we've sought to influence, and in some cases, even those we do not see eye to eye with. What matters is that our message and our vision are engaging the attention of policy and decision makers. As we gather here this week, we have a great opportunity to promote our message and our vision to an even greater audience. Colleagues, Friends, this Congress is taking place as the world's leaders inch toward finalising the new Sustainable Development Goals, known as the post-2015 Agenda, which will be adopted in September at the UN General Assembly. As the focus shifts towards the future and away from the Millennium Development Goals set 15 years ago, we must recognise that much of what we set out to accomplish in education remains unfinished. For most of us here, including education as a future global development goal may be seen as a given. Yet up until a few months ago, it was far from certain that it would be included. However, due to the tireless efforts of EI, of our partner organisations, and of course you, our member organisations, education will be a priority for the global community in the post-2015 period. As a standalone goal, education will receive the focus it rightfully deserves. In these final months leading up to the adoption of the SDG goals, we must continue to push, to keep up the pressure, to ensure that inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all becomes a reality. Colleagues, friends, let us be clear. What this means is free public education that guarantees access, equity, inclusion and gender equality. Whilst some 70 million additional children are in school today, there remain 58 million children out of school, nearly twice the population of Canada. The Millennium Development Goal and the EFA targets had set their sights on making that number zero by the end of this year. Progress has been made, but now we must look ahead and double our efforts to achieve our goal of quality education for all. For as long as a single child remains out of school, we will not rest. We cannot and we will not sit idly by while even one child's life chances is compromised. We have taken action to gain a greater understanding and to highlight why the Millennium Development Goal and the EFA targets have not been achieved. Our goal was to bridge the gap between the school reality and the global debate on education. We are convinced it is crucial to look back at what happened since Dakar and draw lessons for the future. During the last 2 years, we carried out national and regional research and consultations as part of our own EFA assessment. We reviewed education policies, budgets and EFA plans, and we utilised our resources as the voice of educators by collecting the opinions of 15,000 of them from more than 100 countries. It was a lot of work, though desperately needed, to ensure that we don't find ourselves in the future faced with the same sense of failure as we do today. We need accurate information to better inform ourselves and the international community. If we are unaware of what is needed in the classroom, what our teachers and education professionals need to make quality learning a reality, we will never achieve our goals. Our educators on the ground are the real experts. When the results of our assessment were released at the recent World Education Forum in Incheon, South Korea, a few things were very clear. Teachers gave both their governments and EFA policies grades that no parent would want their children to bring home. How governments allocate funding and resources, the level and quality of dialogue between educators and governments, and teaching and learning conditions all received failing grades from our members. The significance of this feedback must be considered as the world moves to chart a new course for the next generation. And on the question of funding, the only real shortfall is a lack of political will to support our educators on the ground, because the money needed to fill the so-called finance gap actually only amounts to the net worth of the world's two wealthiest individuals. The post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals are not only about education, but we believe a quality education to be the bedrock, the starting point of progress. This is not to say that all of the goals to be adopted are not of great importance to society. Of course they all are. These future goals, just as the MDGs that preceded them, represent a social ecosystem. A careful balance, when correctly struck, sees that one influences the other, and then the next, and so on. They must all be given our full and equal attention to see that the generations that follow us have experiences richer and more fulfilled than those which we enjoy today. Colleagues, however, in striking that delicate balance, some concerns, some issues are more important than others. As we gather here as teachers, education workers and trade union leaders, our trade union values are under the spotlight. While we prepare to reiterate our unwavering commitment to social justice and quality education for all through national and international union solidarity, Congress sets the stage for us to debate the most important issues facing education and education workers throughout the world. This is our opportune moment to strengthen and enhance our advocacy for teachers and other education workers' rights. With its long list of human rights champions, from the storied Nellie McClung, who secured women's suffrage, to Louis Riel, who gave the ultimate sacrifice in the struggle for Aboriginal rights, Canada is the ideal place for EI to present its human and trade union rights policy paper to this Congress for adoption. The paper presents a clear statement of the EI position on individual and collective human and trade union rights, and I trust that you will give it resounding endorsement. We must recognise those who had their trade union rights violated by being prevented from travelling here due to either their own government's actions or of the Canadian government's decision to deny visas. Colleagues, friends, we continue to see gender inequality in education and in broader society. When a choice must be made of who to send to school, especially when fees are required, boys are too often the first choice. Girls are left at home, uneducated, and in many cases left powerless in their societies. It is widely recognised that educating girls impacts not only on the individual, but having an education also means that girls will be healthier, that they will delay childbirth, and when they do decide to have children, those children will be more likely to survive, obtain an education in their turn, and live long, successful lives. And when they get to school, too often they are faced with the external threats and dangers simply because they want to be educated. The attack on Malala and her friends in Pakistan, and the missing girls in Nigeria, remind us of how dangerous it is for girls to demand an education in many parts of the world. With disturbing and increasing regularity, violence has become a major deterrent inflicted on them, inflicted on those who want to teach. Attacks on schools and education facilities continue to rise in many parts of the world. This is why EI strongly advocates safe schools in order to achieve our goals of quality education. Teachers and students must be able to teach and learn in safe environments. Can we also recognise that quality education for all transforms societies and challenges those who see education as a threat to their power and authority? Colleagues, much of this violence and gender inequality boils down to poverty and ignorance. We know this is one of the major underlying reasons millions of children remain without a primary education. Until we achieve universal quality public education for all, we stand to make little progress. And this is why we strongly support the new proposed Sustainability Target 4.7 that calls for all learners by 2030 to have acquired knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Colleagues, friends, in Cape Town we turned much of our attention to the plague of austerity that was sweeping throughout the world. We were only 2 years removed from the greatest financial crisis since the 1920s, and the name of the game was to cut, and then cut some more. In many countries, public services and education in particular took the brunt of those cuts, with damage which was irreparable to the aspirations of a generation of young people. We passed a resolution demanding that neoliberal policies would not become the norm. We said that we could not accept that those with the least in society should be driven into poverty and despair. Unfortunately, in many parts of our world, that is exactly what has happened. The wealthy have continued to amass wealth, and the rest of us have been left to cope with the damaging effects of austerity policies. We are often told now that economies are on the upswing. If the markets are strong and the banks as bloated as they've ever been, what could possibly be amiss? What began as austerity has become business as usual in too many countries. In far too many instances, the financial crisis has been used to justify an ideological assault on union rights and public services. Around the world, we are led to believe that the market is the answer to all of our economic ills, that it is the fault of public services and employees for driving us all into an economic abyss, rather than the actions of banks, stock markets and multinational corporations. We see teachers and education unions being blamed directly for the irresponsible actions of governments. Sadly, this rhetoric has embedded itself into the societal conscience. With every financial crisis, natural disaster and crippling war, we see governments continually taking the same exit from their responsibilities as democratically elected bodies. In her revealing book, The Shock Doctrine, Canadian Naomi Klein perfectly summed up our current reality in what she refers to as disaster capitalism. Rather than fulfil their duties to the people they represent, each new disaster is seen as the perfect opportunity by governments to sell off the public good to private hands in the name of efficiency, profit and greed. In our world of education, governments have allowed, facilitated and at times encouraged the invasion of massive global businesses into our education systems. Education has become a goldmine for investors who view children not as students but as economic units, and are more than happy to replace our teachers with tablets or lessons in a box. This is capitalism at its worst, the exploitation of children, their future, and the future of their countries for cold profit. Colleagues, as education unions, we have to shoulder some responsibility for this scourge of privatisation and commercialisation of our domain. We failed to foresee the rapid growth of these global edu-businesses, the size, reach and influence which is scary to say the least. We were possibly not as vigilant as we should have been in confronting, in a globally organised and coordinated manner, the exploitation of education services and facilities by profit-seeking actors. As these edu-businesses move in on public territory around the world, time is ticking away quickly before multiple international trade pacts come into effect. Many of you know them by their various acronyms: TISA, TTIP, CETA and TPP. What is contained within them is a highly guarded secret, deemed too sensitive for the common folk to comprehend. But what we do know from various leaks is that public services are being hawked on the open market, including our students' future. These agreements threaten to undermine public services and to make the takeover of public services a right under the law, leaving countries themselves unable to combat the agreements in national or international courts once they are signed, sealed and delivered. We are introducing resolutions, colleagues, at this Congress to commit ourselves to combat the commercialisation and privatisation of education, to confront policies of continuing austerity, and these secretly negotiated free trade deals that are anything but fair. Our campaign for a global response to the commercialisation and privatisation of education represents our response to the threat posed to public education. We know quality, free public education remains the answer to achieving quality education for all. The provision of education must be regulated, and the profit motive has no place in dictating what is taught, how it's taught and assessed, nor how our schools, colleges and universities are organised. It is time to say no to destructive policies driven by neoliberal ideology that seek only to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Time to say no to omnibus trade agreements, and time to mobilise our membership in the interests of the public good to defend and promote quality, free education for all. Colleagues, friends, there is another threat which demands our attention and our energy. I am talking about the impact of climate change and the irreversible harm we are inflicting on our environment. As a global organisation that champions education as the solution to many of our greatest challenges, we have not focused enough on the role of education in addressing climate change, a challenge which confronts the whole of society and one to which we all contribute. Global warming not only exists, it poses the most serious threat to the continued existence of the planet as we know it today, and we must galvanise our members to confront the global warming challenge before it threatens our very existence. This is a problem that reaches beyond a rising thermostat and sea levels. We are facing a phenomenon that affects our health, reaps havoc on our economies, and generates conflict through the forced migration of people left with no choice but to flee unlivable circumstances. Education alone will not stop the world's worst emitters of greenhouse gases from continuing to exploit our natural world, though it is a crucial element in galvanising public support for action through creating understanding and increasing awareness of the issues. Much of our failings as a species can be boiled down to ignorance. Whether we are talking about women's rights, modern-day slavery, LGBT rights, or the failure to acknowledge the hate represented by a flag from a bygone era, enlightenment through education can create a positive domino effect. Friends, now is the time to use our global standing to take action, to help protect our environment and ensure that future generations look back on our actions with admiration rather than indignation. We have a clear stake in the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. So let us not only focus our efforts seeing education adopted for education's sake, but as the foundation from which all else may be built. It is often said that we are an organisation of organisations, which is true, we are. But more importantly, we are an organisation of people, of educators. And it is these people, our members, who fuel our motivation to work, to strive to improve economic and social circumstances, to achieve a fair and just world. That is what brings us together, to discuss and argue and seek more effective ways to achieve our goals. We live in a world with incredible changes and advancements, but we also live in a world that continues to endure unbearable atrocities, extreme poverty and hopelessness for millions. We are at the heart of a debate that seeks to both bring an end to the suffering as well as eliminate its causes. Through it all, there are positives to look to for motivation and validation of our work. There are those who've faced enormous hardship and beaten the odds to shine a light on even the most desperate of situations. We saw the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to two champions of girls' education and children's rights, Malala and my dear friend Kailash Satyarthi, who are shining examples of how steadfast dedication can inspire far and wide. Colleagues, friends, as we set forth these next 5 days, it is imperative that we keep in mind those who are not here with us, those who rise each day with the purpose of educating their pupils, whether in the developing world or here in a suburb of Ottawa, to help build a better tomorrow. With each resolution passed, the meaning and importance contained within them sets in motion the very work that touches the lives of our 32 million individual members and the millions of young lives they influence every day. Colleagues, let us follow the wise words of renowned Canadian author Margaret Atwood, who once said, "If enough people show by the issues they raise and by the way they're willing to vote that they want changes made, then change becomes possible. You may not be able to alter reality, but you can alter your attitude towards it, and this, paradoxically, alters reality." Sisters and brothers, together we must forge ahead and create the change we seek in order to realise the reality we want. I thank you and wish us all an inspired and productive World Congress.